Welcome to the latest episode of Gear in the Machine. I'm Ryan Cleveland, the multiplayer design director for Gears of War. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming 2.8 beta for the competitive tuning for Versus. We have a big directional shift coming, and before we released it, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about what we were going to do and why we were doing it. Previous to 2.8, we created this new movement model for Gears of War 4 that has a long and a short slide distance when you cancel, and we did this to create a more skillful movement. And we saw sort of a way that we could get really deep movement while trying to get the sort of two different playstyles of competitive gamers to play in one playstyle. And based on a lot of feedback from the community as well as internal analysis, we've decided to look at options to really try to balance these two different playstyles rather than force everybody to play the same way. In the upcoming clips, you're going to see examples of how people play in these two different playstyles. And with 2.8, we're going to be announcing some pretty big changes that try to really allow the users to play the way that they want to within each one of these two playstyles, and we're going to balance them together. So check it out. First, we're going to take a look at what's currently in Gears of War. Previous to 2.8, we had a movement system that what we thought was a really high skill movement system where we call it the long short system. After a cancel, the slide distance would shorten up so that players to master really fast bouncing would have to keep in mind which sort of state they were in, whether they were in a short slide or a long slide, and master that effectively. We've got a demonstration here where we're looking at what it looks like to do this really well, to be able to manage understanding that distance while you're sliding inside combat. Now, if you fail, you'll roll, right? So what the idea here is to balance precise movement with fast movement. And we saw this as a much deeper way to move inside Gears of War, and we think it was successful in creating a higher skill gap, but a lot of players felt that this was not allowing them to play the game that they wanted to play. So we're going to take a look at what this looks like when it doesn't work out so well. So when someone hasn't figured out quite how to use the 2.7 and previous movement system, it sort of looks like this, where they're going to end up misrolling. If they're using default controls, they're going to end up misrolling quite a bit. So they've misjudged the slide distance, and slides that they would have normally made if they hadn't canceled are now a roll. So this means that the really deep, players that are able to think about it can succeed, but players that haven't quite mastered this, there's a pretty significant penalty to misjudging those distances. And this didn't feel good to people that really wanted to bounce really fast. And it wasn't really intuitive to people that were just learning it. So while we think that overall it made a much higher skill gap for the game, this really wasn't embracing the best of what players thought the movement in Gears of War could be. So we've taken that feedback, we've listened to it, and we've got something that we're cooking on for 2.8. Next, we're going to take a look at some of the shooting mechanics for the shotgun. The current shotgun has a characteristic that's been around for a long time, since Gears 3, where it gets a little less accurate when you move. And we're going to show that here. When I stand still, the pellet spread's a little bit smaller. The jitter sort of goes down. When I move, you can see the jitter of where the bullets go. It gets larger, as well as the actual size of the pellet spread kind of increases. This may be a characteristic you may have not even noticed before. It's pretty subtle, but what it does do is it means that when you start strafing, your accuracy goes down. And this was one of the things that we realized that kind of really put strafing at more of a disadvantage to hyper bouncing, was that when you're just even strafing a little bit, moving, your pellet spread is less effective than people hyper bouncing, and we're going to explain why in just a second. So you can see here the same effect a little more clearly, where when I L trigger, you can actually see the fact that the pellet spread itself gets even smaller. So the L trigger will actually change the pellet size, and that's to make the pellets be consistent on the screen. Now, that means there's sort of three different states. There's L trigger to get the tightest spread, there's standing still, not strafing, not moving, to get the medium-sized spread, and then there's moving at full speed to get the largest spread. Now, These sizes will mean that at the same distance to a target, you're going to get different amounts of pellets that hit, which means there's different amounts of damage that hits. So strafing and L-triggering has depth to it, but it also means that it has some subtle hidden costs. And once we were looking deep into this, we felt that to support two different play styles, we really wanted to address the benefits and the kind of drawbacks of when people decided to play in one of these two different ways. Once we'd reviewed how the shotgun the spread changed, we did some investigating and we found a little quirk of the system where when you slide and cancel, the system, because of the way that the animation system is set up, it doesn't really think you're moving. So for a very brief moment, you get a very accurate shot. And if there's somebody that's around the corner from you, it combines with the auto aim to make a really, really impactful corner shot. So as you slide in, cancel, and shoot, you get a really tight, really accurate shot. And we thought that probably was making hyperbouncing kind of a little more overpowered than we wanted it to be. And that meant that if you're sliding and canceling, just sort of throwing shots around, the system sort of rewarded you for that. And compared to the punishment that you were getting from strafing, we thought that these two systems were out of whack. And to balance two different play styles, we're really looking at how we can address the shooting here as well as the movement to create the best possible experience for these two different play styles. Thanks for checking out the latest episode of Gear in the Machine. We're going to be going into a lot more detail after 2.8 gets released. Stay tuned.